next, and we're going to have to repeal. Yesterday, one of the heads of our military said that if we don't repeal sequestration, it will put American lives in danger. That should be a lesson to all of my colleagues.
I'm one of those who didn't quite like the Billy Club approach to it, but it's better than not cutting it all. And so we've been able to actually achieve some savings in discretionary spending that we wouldn't have otherwise, and we can't get rid of this sequester unless we find other ways to cut.
Well, the president's getting ready to send his budget up to Congress, the 2016 budget, Monday. It's going to include, we're told, an end to the sequestration. You remember the sequestration, the across-the-board cuts, kind of like a meat cleaver across different agencies. Not popular, especially in the Pentagon. Let's take a review about the sequester and what the president has said about it.
First of all, the sequester is not something that I proposed. It's something that Congress has proposed. It will not happen.
Bob, as the man who literally wrote the book about the budget battle, put this to rest. Whose idea was the sequester, and did you ever think that we'd actually get to this point?
First of all, it was the White House. It was Obama and Jack Lew and Rod Neighbors who went to the Democratic leader in the Senate, Harry Reid, and said, this is the solution. But everyone has their fingerprints on this.
So just in short, the sequester was supposed to be a backstop so that they never got to that point and that Republicans and Democrats could deal. Well, they didn't, and they got to it. Let's bring in our panel. Tucker Carlson, host of Fox and Friends Weekend, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor of The Hill, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. A.B., the president says he wants to get rid of the sequester that's popular with the military. Republicans are split on this because some of them really like the cutting, but they don't like the harm to the military.
Right. Well, the sequester has been replaced before. Republicans are not going to put an end to it, but it's been replaced with more sensible cuts in the last year and a half. This suggestion that it can be a thing of the past and eliminated is going to be problematic, even though the president has proposed a little bit more relief for the military spending side, which is supposed to lure Republicans into agreement. What you're going to see is our proposals by the Republicans to replace the military, the sequester cuts, replace more military spending because it is affecting readiness, and Senator McCain is right about that. There may be a chance now with the threat of ISIS that Democrats join in for increasing military spending, but they're going to fight for that non-defense discretionary spending all the way, and tax hikes and more spending that busts the caps in President Obama's budget are off the table.
So,
just put it in some perspective, 2 points. There are no net cuts. Federal spending is still growing at hundreds of billions of dollars a year. A. B.
Sure, it's slowing the growth.
Yeah,
that
but
they
it's still
call
growing.
A cut here in Washington.
At hundreds of billions a year. We're spending more every year in the middle of the sequester. By the way, our society has not collapsed, contrary to the president and the administration's predictions. Sequestration was going to make sure that our children were illiterate, our seniors starved to death, would be riding the streets. The FBI sent out a press release saying, we can't gas up our vehicles. Do you remember all that?
FAA said the lines at airports are going to be...
And now they're bragging about the health of the economy. So maybe that tells you something. Third, of course it's a dumb way to cut spending. Nobody disagrees with that. But there's an awful lot of money being spent on defense. I'm for defense spending, but we're spending what, $300 million per F-35 fighter. Some of them are costing that much. So you can't tell me that there's not a smarter way to allocate money and to allocate troops. We just sent 1,400 troops to Liberia to, quote, fight Ebola. There are smarter ways to run a military than we're currently doing.
Charles, it's interesting the way the president appears to be positioning this to split Republicans and to raise taxes and to use that money elsewhere. Meanwhile, he touts deficit reduction, which largely could be pointing to the sequester.
Well, the entire idea that he's the big deficit cutter is ridiculous. He's been the biggest deficit increaser in the history of the galaxy. And what he's done is that he has reduced that to gargantuan levels. In other words, from 1.5 trillion, it's now a third of that, and still the historically highest level of deficit we've ever seen.
Not to mention the national debt that is...
Which has already exploded, into which he's added about 5 or 6 trillion. So, he's doing a dance in the end zone, and, he's not even past the 50-yard line on this. But on the issue of where you cut, I think what the Republicans ought to do is just simply ignore his budget. I mean, his tax plans are so absurd. The budget is going to be dead on arrival, so when it arrives, you toss it in the wastebasket. Republicans have control of the House and the Senate. Offer a bill, pass a bill in the House and the Senate that actually removes the sequester on defense and redoes the priorities. Let the president have it on his desk. If he vetoes it, you reimpose the sequester. But I think to give in to the president on this issue and to be bribed into supporting the military, of which he's commander-in-chief, you'd think he'd care about the levels of the funding in the Defense Department in order to cut a hugely wasteful domestic spending, I think is something that Republicans ought not acquiesce to.
So you're saying save the paper, just email it? Don't print it out.
Or you burn it,
AB, is there any prospect for any bigger deal? The prospect of anything that wraps all of this together?
Well, the big package with the bow is always tax reform, and there are people who are closest and work the hardest on this issue, and I've spoken with them. There are high-level Republicans talking to members of the administration. There is a lot of happy talk on tax reform, and that would balance the books. It would address entitlements. It would help with revenues. It would be bipartisan. I just don't know, this close already to the presidential election, that we're going to see a big deal between a president that just, last week in the State of the Union was pretty much frustrating the Republican majority and speaking much to his left. It's hard to see a huge deal coming together like that.
We always say we're one election away from really getting it done.
We're close. We're really close. He doesn't care about math. Come on.
Next up, is Hillary Clinton already on cruise control?